This is the Millennial Millionaire Through Real Estate podcast.
We met with him and he's like, you know what? I'll take a risk with you guys. You guys are like, he thought it was funny that he realized we didn't have enough money to do this deal, but he thought it was funny that we had the balls to even attempt a deal like this at that high level. And he's like, I think you guys are going to pay the rent.
You're listening to the Millennial Millionaire Through Real Estate podcast, where we discuss tangible tips, tricks, and best practices for becoming financially free. The show is designed for people who want to either start real estate investing or for those who want to scale their real estate business.
What's up, guys? This is jonjfarber, host of the Millennial Millionaire Through Real Estate podcast. This show is all about achieving financial freedom as fast as possible so you can do whatever makes you happy in life. For me, that vehicle was real estate, and it's how I achieved financial freedom at 27. If you want to know how I got started, my journey is presented in a YouTube video posted in the show notes, and I post daily in our private Facebook group about my favorite topics and day-to-day strategies. I appreciate you guys being here, and let's get started. Oh, by the way, reach out if you ever need help. I try to keep my calendar open to talk to anyone that needs it or has any quick questions. See you guys. Talk to you later. This episode is sponsored by Infinite Road Destinations, the smartest short-term rental property management group I know, and the group that manages my properties. This is a company that's very close to my heart, run by two of the smartest, most attentive people I know, Claire Rosenberg and Alex Brashears. Claire and I first met when we worked together at NetApp, where she was a top performer and rose crazy fast in the company. And Alex is just one of the most active, genuine people I know in the real estate space. The two of them together bring a blended background of project management, software design, and extensive experience with automation tools and virtual assistants. Through these experiences, they optimize any property to deliver a hands-off experience to owners while delivering the highest occupancy and highest daily rates possible. You guys know I would not recommend anything to anyone in this group that I do not fully endorse or think that is the absolute best product. And this company is that. And like I said before, this is the exact company and people that manage my Airbnbs. If you don't believe me, here are a few of the other tools and services that come along with the team: listing optimization, guest support and approval, communication and reservations, key exchange and management, dynamic pricing, welcome kit creation, listing advertising and marketing, vendor management, including cleaners, maintenance, handymen, runners, and monthly property reports. To learn more, check out shorttermmadeeasy.com or email info@shorttermmadeeasy.com. And on the forum, just mention that you heard it here or mention my name. So give it a try. You have nothing to lose, and they offer a satisfaction guarantee. And I assure you guys, you will not be disappointed. What's up, guys? Back with another awesome episode with Lazaro Vento. He started in car sales and became a top performer, but then grew a business into Airbnb arbitrage and now a massive fleet on Turo. He has over 100 units on Airbnb arbitrage and now about 23 luxury cars driving on Turo. He's got an awesome story, lost everything just a couple years ago and rebuilt it to now a really nice, successful business. He's got employees, he's got systems, and he's continuing to scale. He thinks he's going to add another 50 to 100 units just in the next quarter or so. So it's an awesome story. And he basically took it from homeless to now $1 million business. So if you guys are interested in doing anything Airbnb related, Airbnb arbitrage related, negotiating with landlords, negotiating with buildings, trying to figure out the best ways to buy cars, trying to figure out the best way to figure out if a car can make money in that area, this is the episode for you. We got into all those topics, and Lazaro is a funny guy, man. He's got a lot of different tactics and styles about him, and he just likes to have fun. He's also got an awesome cigar business, and he's got a great social media following as well on that. I was checking him out on Instagram before we hit the show, and he's just a funny dude. So I think you guys are going to really enjoy this. We got into all those topics and wanted to make it as tactical as possible. The main learning I had from this show was most places will rent. Like, I know most people are concerned before they get started on how to pick an area, and I was too. And not to say that this is easy and you can just kind of throw a dart at a board, but if you do a certain amount of research, some level of research, and talk to people locally and see that there is success in other groups, other people, and you're looking at their calendars and just seeing their reviews, you can pretty much assume that if you do a good job and put up a good listing and manage it well, you can have success as well. I would say right now it would be more surprising if an area did not do well than if it did do well. Not to say that every area can, but I would say if you do a little bit of research, reading, talk to realtors, you'd be surprised. Most areas I think can do well and have some level of demand right now just for furnished housing. It's very surprising. I couldn't believe it either, but even in our own properties, I had a lot of doubts. And when we got them off the ground after doing months of research, I realized that we probably could have done it much sooner. Today's tangible tip is buying a business credit card and then quickly buying other things on that card before, let's say, it hits your personal credit. I don't know if, this is the most commonly advised thing to do, but basically Lazaro mentioned that a trick in the car industry is that when people buy cars, they buy a couple at a time so that it's before they hit their credit. It doesn't hit the credit bureau if you buy 3 cars in the same day or 2-day span. So he goes on buying sprees whenever he buys multiple cars. And I think at one point he picked up like 8 in a week, and he was just trying to do them as quickly as he could, get them in place, set up the process, and then he would have kind of more cars in his fleet. And then he can kind of rinse and repeat once they get off the ground and do well. So I thought that was interesting. Never really heard of that. I have looked into kind of the credit building process, but I didn't know there was a way to kind of speed it up so that it wouldn't hit your credit in time and you could buy more stuff. So that was today's tangible tip. Enjoy. Awesome episode today with Lazaro Vento. All right, Larazo, what is going on, my man? Appreciate you being on the show and excited to have you here. How are you?
Great. Nice to be here. That's for sure.
Yeah, man.
We're here. We made it.
We made it. We got through it. And, I'm sure you see this too with a lot of people. There were people that made big strides during COVID, and then there were people that were waiting or kind of maybe went backwards during COVID. But it sounds like you really took some strides and expanded your business, man. We'll get into all that. But before we do, I just would love if you could kind of kick off with an intro or just kind of a high level how you got started in business, in real estate, in cars, and bring us up to speed from a high level what you do today in the business.
All right. Yeah, that's actually an important part of the story. So I've been doing this arbitrage thing for about 7 years. The way I started this business is I used to be in the car business, and I was like a high level salesperson for about 13 years for BMW and Rolls-Royce. And I really hated my job after that at that time. Like probably a lot of your listeners do. And I was making a high level of income, 300 to 400K a year. And I really hated my job. When I first started, I loved my job. How many, I was 21 or something, how many 21-year-olds are making that kind of money? And it was cool for a while. And then you get a little older and you start thinking about your future. And I read and as things were kind of evolving, I read The 4-Hour Workweek by Timothy Ferriss. And I'm like, wow, man, I need to do something else with my life, because, I'm working 100 hours a week. And, I'm like, man, the 2 guys that work with us have had heart attacks here. I'm like, I don't want this. So then they made some changes. And the next book I read was like Who Moved My Cheese? Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. But it's about change and, how you adapt to change. And like, I made a decision pretty quickly to just quit my job. And I said, well, I'm going to start this. That's why if you look at my Instagram, it's brickellcigars. And some people don't even ask why like a real estate company's name is brickellcigars. But brickellcigars was my cigar company. And when I started that business, I had some money saved up, and I thought it was kind of bulletproof. I was still pretty cocky. And in about a year and a half, almost 2 years, I lost everything, my entire life savings. All my cars got repossessed, and I wound up getting evicted from my house.
What year was that?
That was, what year was that? Well, 7 years ago. So we opened the cigar shop in 13. And like by late 15, my life was in shambles, and imagine I was actually we were crashing in a friend's like spare bedroom, and then we it wasn't a fun time in my life. And as part of like what I was trying to do, just hustling, I got my real estate license, and I thought I could be a realtor and do something on the side to kind of survive. And one of my customers at the cigar shop saw that I was, he was a friend, and he realized I was struggling financially. Quite imagine I was living, my cars got repossessed right in front of the business, and I was living in a friend's spare bedroom. Um, so he needed to buy a place, and I guess he figured, why not give me a commission? And I helped him find this place in a pretty rough neighborhood, and it was kind of an edgy part of Miami. And I tried to talk him out of the deal. Actually, I said, this is a bad neighborhood. That we're paying the people who live here $5,000 to move out. The tenants are gonna suck. What are you gonna do? He's like, well, I'm gonna do this Airbnb thing. And I'm like, what the hell's Airbnb? I didn't know what it was. And he's like, well, you explained it to me. And I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. And I guess that could work. I still thought it was like a fantasy. I'm like, what the hell? Who's gonna stay into your house like that? That's that'll never work. But then I did a little research, and there was this guy back then in New York who was doing Airbnb at a really high level. He was, I think, on Fortune magazine or something. And I saw the article, and so the guy was making $1 million a year. And I need to make that, $1 million. And so I did a little research, and I'm like, well, this guy's making $1 million. My buddy's spending $250,000 to buy this house in the hood, because he thinks he's going to make money. I mean, I think I should probably try to do something. So I found, this was before the concept of arbitrage even existed, but since I didn't have credit to buy a house or money to buy a house, I said, well, maybe I could rent a place that's kind of like a duplex, and I could live for free, maybe, if the numbers work out. And that's what I did. I went out and I found in that same neighborhood, all the houses kind of were set up where they had like a guest house in the back. Mm-hmm. So I found this house, and with the commission I got, and I borrowed some money from my dad or somebody, because I had no money. I talked this landlord into leasing me this place when I had just gotten evicted, and he let me lease it, and it was perfect. I went and furnished it off of Craigslist free, because once I leased it, I didn't have any money to buy furniture. So I just, I put together a hodgepodge of stuff, and Airbnb used to take the photos for free. So they gave me free photography. And within 15 minutes of being on the platform, I made $1,000 over what my rent and my expenses would be. And I said, well, that'll work.
Wow.
I could survive, at that point, I was thinking about a means of survival in my cigar business. I really didn't think that the concept of arbitrage wasn't even a thing. And right away, once I did that deal, even though I had no money, I saw another for rent sign, like next door. And I kind of just called the landlord just to talk to him and, see if he would be willing to do a deal with me, even though I knew I had no money to do the deal. But I got the guy to meet me, and he met me, and we talked for an hour about BMWs and stuff like that, because he turned out to be a BMW guy. And he's like, well, he met me even knowing that he had rented the house. Just so you understand, I just wanted to meet him because I figured he would be like a good landlord or something to have in my database. And most people won't dare make that phone call, but I did it. I got him to meet me. And what wound up happening is that house was set up exactly like my house, and we were right next to each other. And it was a house with a guest house, and he was renting them separately. And the tenant that he rented the back part to kind of flaked out on him or something, and was fighting with his wife. And he called me out of the blue a week later and said, hey, do you still want that little house? And I'm like, man, I still have the money. And he's like, well, no, don't worry. I understand. Because I explained to him what I was doing next door. And he's like, it sounds like you could make the money. And I'm like, yeah, I think I could. If you give me a week or two, I'll put it on the platform and furnish it, and I'll get you the money. And it happened the same thing. There was very little competition in Miami, and so I could list anything for $120 a night, and somebody would book it for 20 nights, and I'd give him his money, and that's exactly what happened. And at that point, I wound up thinking, well, maybe I should expand this. And landlords like him were instrumental. Back then, he gave me another property. And then if you look at the Bigger Pockets forum, I was an early poster about and I wound up getting a crazy amount of like response off that post, because I was like, I'm doing this thing. I don't like, people were kind of like throwing the term arbitrage out there, and I'm like, I'm doing this thing where I have like these houses here, and I don't own anything, and my credit's jacked up. And I was trying to like see if anybody else was kind of doing the same thing anywhere, and like people were like, what the hell are you talking about? What do you mean somebody gave you $2 million worth of houses and you had no credit? And it just kind of evolved from there, to the point where little by little I just kept getting more units, and any profit that I would get, I would roll it into the business. And once I reached the point where I couldn't get any more property, I decided to, start house hacking before it was even before there was any websites or anything talking about this. I'm like, well, I bet you, I started looking, and my house at that point was very valuable on the short term because it was those houses in that neighborhood are like little old style like villas, and they were like worth like $1,000 a night on Airbnb or other platforms on the weekends. So what we would wind up doing is we would put it on Airbnb, and I had set up the house so we could just like leave on like an hour's notice. So you have to be like a real nomad to do this play. And I would have the house set up, me and my wife would be ready, and somebody would book the place for $3,000. I had like a 3-day minimum, $3,000. And then we would just find another Airbnb just further north in the state of Florida. And most of them would be like a house with a pool, and I could get it for like $90. And so we would have like these little weekend excursions, but we would make money to keep funding our business, because we would make like the spread. So if it was like $400 for the weekend and I made $2,800, I made $2,400 profit, and we could keep rolling that in to possibly doing another deal. And we repeated that process for a couple years, just like accumulating cash flow to get more deals. And that was one of the strategies that I used to get more money.
Gotcha. And then when did you get into cars? Because I haven't heard anything about cars to this point.
Well, the cars, I got into this car thing like 6 months ago.
And where is that? Again, bring us up to speed. But again,
bring us up to speed on the car thing.
Who you are from cold, they don't know you, but you have.
Well, it's actually kind of funny.
They just know you for arbitrage right now. For rental arbitrage. What's up with the cars?
So the car thing is kind of funny. So I already had this whole, at this point, I already had kind of a pretty big real estate business with AIRBNB'S, and my personal, I felt kind of stagnant myself. I've been doing the same thing forever, and I was looking for something else to do and to have a little bit more fun. And I started watching a lot of different podcasts on opportunities and job opportunities or income opportunities. And like one night I watched this podcast, which was to buy 33 cars in 2 weeks. And that really appealed to me. And I'm like, what do you mean buy 33 cars? And I watched it, and then it was like a back-to-back with these two guys from Atlanta. That the other guy did kind of the same thing. And I'm like, wow. And I could tell by the way they were talking that they were actually sincere about what the things that they were talking about doing, and the fact that they were actually doing it. And I was like, one of them is Pushman Mitch. They're like, like local Atlanta celebrities, and CEO Matty J. These two guys were like just like talking about, and they have all these exotic cars. And I'm like, man, I really would love to have an exotic car, but it'd be too expensive. And but when I saw what they were doing, I'm like, man, you could probably, if this actually works, you could have a fleet of exotic cars for free. And so I went out and I tested the water. Like my first car I did was a Mercedes AMG convertible.
How'd you get the first car?
I went out and I remember I had some experience in the car business, so I kind of knew how to buy cars and lease cars. So I went to a Mercedes dealer, and I went out and leased a new Mercedes. And I figured, at that point, well, if this doesn't work, I'll just have another car, and it won't be that big a deal. Mm-hmm. And it took me about 2 weeks to even list it on the Turo platform, because I was still kind of like, do I do this? And one day I said, well, I think I should do it. And I put it in. I got my first renter, and it was actually pretty cool. The was a nice guy. And I got lucky that my first renter was somebody who had a bunch of reviews and had, took good care of the car, and it made me feel real comfortable. I'm like, well, if every renter is like this is cool. And the next few people were just as nice. And I'm like, well, maybe I should get more cars. And I started just going out there and trying to source more cars until I wound up with like 10 cars. And I'm like, well,
you were leasing those or buying those cars?
I did like a mix. I leased, I bought, I did whatever I could. I did a strategy that a lot of these guys are doing is I bought all the cars real quick. So before they all posted on my credit. So I bought a bunch of cars, and some of them I did because I wasn't in the car business. I knew how to structure deals and how I bought a few cars in my business name, knowing that doesn't affect my debt to income because they don't show up on my personal credit. And I kind of spread the deals out in a way that I could make it work. And when I had seen that podcast, I had reached out to both these guys, and they're social media influencers, both of them, and they were nice enough to get back to me, both of them. And they're like, I hope you do it, and this and that. I'm like, I'm gonna do it. I'll show you. And in that month, I made $22,000 doing this car rental thing. So I sent it to them, and everybody went crazy. And because in that business, apart from those two guys, very few people had taken that level of action that had actual like proof of it. And like now I have 23 cars, and I bought a Ferrari like 3 weeks ago or something, and nice. I bought a Bentley, and I've bought 2 G-Wagons, and it's cool. I'm gonna keep buying cars, and
for sure.
And it's a profitable business. I mean, now I hired two guys.
Let's jump into the details, man, because I feel like I have probably 25 questions that we had even sent in, and I have a bunch more just from going through this. So I wanna unpack this, man, because I feel like it's just gonna keep going up, which is amazing. So,
well, this car thing is pretty cool. The other thing I discovered is I could kind of unite the Airbnb business and this car business. And actually, because nobody had really kind of thought about doing it like that, Airbnb and Turo both reached out to me, and we're doing like some kind of interview for the Airbnb magazine soon.
Oh, no way.
And yeah, like they like, because what I actually started doing is, since I use like an automation tool.
Which tool is that?
Smart BNB. I started like dropping my Turo link in, and I have a big like amount of reservations, more than an average host. I have 100 properties. So I guess somehow in the data, Airbnb and Turo both saw that I'm like cross-selling, and somebody internally must have noticed that, and they reached out, and they want to know how I'm doing that, because I'm getting a big percentage of reservations off of the platform, and then I'm selling backwards to Turo guests. So I'm doing like kind of like what like Travelocity or something does, but like me, just as some guy thinking, well, I could package these two things together and maybe do more business. Sure. And it worked out pretty nicely. And
let's get into the question that most people are gonna ask listening to this interview. How can they start today on Turo or for rental arbitrage? And actually, before we do that, can you just define what both of these things are? What is Airbnb arbitrage, and then what is this Turo business that you're doing? For those that don't know, I think they can put it together, but how do you think about it?
Well, I mean, the Airbnb business, arbitrage business is pretty simple. I mean, you got to find yourself a landlord that's willing to lease you a property, and there has to be a spread between what the 30-day rate is when you're renting long-term, and the nightly rate is when you're leasing short-term.
Sure.
Now, one thing I tell people, like, you have to be upfront with these landlords if you're planning to have any sort of sustainable business. Like, I see people that they get into arbitrage and they don't tell the landlord. Like the reason why I kept growing is because I kept telling every landlord what I was doing and trying to make them involved in the process. Like, this is a cool thing. This is what we're doing. And the landlords that say yes, they help you grow. The Turo business is pretty similar. It is an arbitrage. I go out and I finance a car or lease a car. Let's say some of them are doing crazy numbers, like a G-Wagon, let's say. I got myself a 14 G-Wagon, and the payments $1,200 a month or something. I almost didn't buy it because I thought it was too old, and I put it on the platform, and it has a high utilization. Now I find out, I figured, well, I bought it pretty cheap, so I'll make it kind of the cheapest one in my market for like $300 a night, and the thing's making like $8,000 a month, and the car payment's only $1,500.
And these are in Miami.
Yeah, that's a substantial profit margin. And it's easier to buy a car than it is to convince a landlord to give you his real estate. And so a lot of the students that I have, they're starting off like, they'll buy 3-4 cars and get some cash flow going. And that's a good way of starting your business, especially if you have some credit, because it does take credit to buy cars unless you have a lot of cash.
So which are you going more into right now? Cars or Airbnb, Turo or Airbnb?
I'm going hard in both. I mean, I got I just closed this 15-unit deal. I just closed another 4-unit deal in Hollandale. I'm working on a 9-unit deal, and at the same time, I'm buying cars and I'm upgrading my fleet. Like some of the cars, I say, well, this was not performing as well, but the values of cars right now are through the roof. So I could trade out of cars and make little moves to improve the quality of my fleet.
For sure. So one thing that I get asked a lot, I'm sure you get asked all the time too, is how do you find landlords? How do you find buildings? So walk us through your process of how you find landlords, how you find buildings, and then what is your process to know if that area is going to make money? Because I think these are the two questions that hold people up from getting started. So how do you find landlords or buildings? And then what is your step-by-step process from a high level of how do you know that area is going to be profitable or that unit?
That's actually a good question, because everybody's like, one thing, like to me now, like it seems like unlikely that an area will do good, but most people, they think, well, what if it doesn't rent? Like,
you're saying it's unlikely that it won't do well. Like most areas can do well. Gotcha. Yeah.
It's unlikely. Like it seems like anywhere you are, you could do business on Airbnb. So it's unlikely you won't do well, like, because I've done it so many times, I already know that. But if you've never done it, like, imagine, oh my God, I just signed a lease for $3,000, and what if it doesn't rent? And what I find out that it's unlikely that it won't rent. Mm-hmm. You have to really be in somewhere that nobody's ever going to go to. And even there's like, I have a friend that he was like leasing, like, those little play cottages.
Yeah.
Like the Amish play cottages, like he put that on a piece of land in the middle of like nowhere, and with no water, no electric, just a flashlight and a bucket, and he was able to rent it on Airbnb. So
wow.
and so that tells you that there's a market for almost anything. Now, how do we find landlords? That's an average question that everybody asks. Well, there's a few ways of finding stuff. Like we have a method that works. It's kind of old school, but it works. I do a lot of driving for dollars. So I'm driving around and I'll look for real estate signs, especially a sign that lets me know that whoever developed that building is also marketing it themselves. Like this is like smaller buildings. Like if you're looking at a 4 to 6 unit building, it'll usually say like leasing, and it'll have like some management company that you've never heard of, but it won't have a realtor's information. And that to me is good, because that means, well, I could probably, if I'm persistent, I could get to meet the person who built that place, and we'll have a lunch meeting or something and talk about it. And that's one way we do it. Now, the other way is I use a few agents. Like I've trained a few agents to become deadly closers on getting people to say yes to us on the arbitrage business. And I tell a lot of my students, agents are kind of like free employees if you know how to use them effectively, because you don't pay a real estate agent anything. They work on commission, and the owners are the ones that are paying those commissions. Now, if you have an agent that you got him to the point that he's made money with you, he's gonna do all the work. Like I have 2 agents, like one other, Sabrina, she's the way I met her, I was buying a house, and the deal actually didn't work out, and I actually wound up losing my escrow deposit in the deal because of it. Due to COVID, we couldn't close. But I saw that she's such a good salesperson that I'm like, well, we could use you. Let me train you on how to find us real estate. And she's become like now her whole business is doing deals with guys like me. She has like 4 people, and that's all she's doing is arbitrage deals. And she figured out how to get to the owner and then get a meeting. And once we meet, it's just we glad hand and we do a deal. So you're trading an agent to get to that point. Hey, look, I represent a company that does corporate housing, and they're growing, they're expanding. Your property's a good fit. And then, she'll go into the benefits of doing that. Hey, they take care of all the maintenance. They have their own housekeeping team. They always pay on time. They carry insurance. I carry the insurance from Proper, which the vacation rental insurance for $1 million a door. And all those are things that these landlords want. And, and we created a nice little package of information for them. So we seem like real professionals, and we get a meeting with them. It's rather simple. It's not like some magical formula of getting them to say yes. But what we have to get them to do is at least listen to us long enough so we can meet them in person. And usually in person, we can show them, hey, look, this is what we do. And if this person is building a building, he's an investor, and he would much rather deal with an investor than some standard tenant. And this is the other thing, is a lot of these neighborhoods that we're in, they're changing neighborhoods. So still some of the tenants that they're going to get are probably not the best. So as a landlord, who would you rather do business with? A company that has already $100,000 rent roll, or some guy that makes $2,000 a month? It's a simple close when you put it like that. And that's how we get a lot of the property as well.
Okay, awesome. That's cool. That's definitely step by step. Do you, the question I get a lot of times is, do you do anything to try to give or get concessions, or terms that you like to try to see when you're trying to land an arbitrage deal with a landlord, like lease length or free months, or how much deposit you put down, anything like that you recommend, or for someone that's trying to get started?
That's actually a good question. In the beginning, I'll tell you what I did to grow my company. I got to the point where I was able to get some capital, and I went out and I didn't negotiate on anything. I just said, I found an agent who actually became my business partner, and I told him, look, what we're gonna do is this building allows Airbnb, so we're gonna tell every owner that we'll give them $50 more than anybody else, and we'll give them first, last, and security. That way we could get every unit, because I wanted to have a massive scale of units, and I realized the profit margins. So you gotta be smart in negotiating. If you know that there's a big profit, it's not smart to try to get a discount. What you want to do is try to get the real estate. Now, if you're working on, there's other types of deals that, when I did a 52 unit deal, that deal required some concessions, because we're talking about a huge scale of units and the time requirements to prepare them. So in deals like that, I think on that one, we got 1 month's free rent as a build out period, because we needed enough time to build out the units. And a deal like that, we got in, instead of first, last, and security, we did first month plus $500. That's kind of an industry standard when you're doing deals, big deals. That was the same deal I did here in Tampa, and kind of the same deal I'll do with any big commercial landlord, where you're taking a big percentage of a property. They'll do your first month plus $500 is kind of like a standard. Some of them will give you some free time. I'll get into how we got that big deal if you like. So which is actually goes into how to get deals. We were eating tacos at this taco place, and I look up, we're kind of like looking across the street, and there's this sign that says 4 months free rent. Now, if you ever see signs that say stuff like this, take notice, because it's unusual. And I knew it was unusual because I'd seen 2 months free rent, but I had never seen 4 months free rent. So I said, well, that's a new building, and this is kind of an edgier neighborhood to have a brand new, gigantic building like this. And I think we should maybe reach out to them. I mean, if they're giving 4 months free, there's got to be a problem, and that's the way you got to think. And we just reached out, and this is a gigantic commercial landlord, like the third biggest developer in the United States. And we reached out, and we just send them like an email, like, hey, we're interested in doing deals, and I think we could take a floor. Reach out to us. And that email actually got to the vice president of the company, because they were having a real hard time leasing this place. And so they called us up, and we wound up having a meeting with them. And then I wound up the meeting had to go to like the CEO of that company, because they didn't want anybody to the project was so big that they didn't want anybody just to take a floor. Somebody needed to take a big chunk of the building, which was 52 apartments. And the only people crazy enough to do the deal was us. And the only other people that had enough money to do the deal was Saunders, which is like a $1 billion company. And this guy, they already kind of had to deal with Saunders. And we met with him, and he's like, you know what? I'll take a risk with you guys. You guys are like, he thought it was funny that he realized we didn't have enough money to do this deal, but he thought it was funny that we had the balls to even attempt a deal like this at that high level. And he's like, I think you guys are going to pay the rent. And I'm like, well, I think so too. And he gave us a shot, and when we did the deal, we kind of thought it'd be kind of like, Firefest. Yep. Well, I thought we would wind up kind of like Firefest, because we wouldn't be able to complete the project. And
where was that project? Where was that project?
In Brickell.
Oh, gotcha. Wow. Okay. I have questions about that too, but that's awesome. So how did it go when you got it stood up? Or was there any other bumps in the road?
It's kind of a funny thing. So we got the deal, and I took out every dollar I had made over all those years, and my partner took his whole life savings, and then borrowed some money from his dad, because to furnish a project like that, you're talking about $1 million or something, wow. Between furnishings and different expenses that go into putting a deal like that together. Now, the reason why we knew we could do the deal was because of the free time. They gave us 30 days free rent. But we figured if we could it was spring break and Ultra was coming. So we figured if we could get the place ready, that's how come I got really good at like preparing apartments and making them ready quickly. If we could get the place ready in 2 weeks, we would have enough money because once we bought all the furniture and stuff, we didn't have enough money to pay the first month's rent, which was $150K. So the only way we could pay the first month's rent is if we could move quickly enough to furnish the entire building in 2 weeks. So
how did you do that? Like, I would love to hear. Where did you source the furniture? Where did you get the operations? Who was helping you?
Well, we had to get pretty efficient. So at first we tried like unskilled guys that we found to try to build all this furniture. It didn't work.
Where did you get
the
furniture?
Then I discovered TaskRabbit. I don't know if you've heard of TaskRabbit.
I have. Where did you get the furniture?
Well, we bought most of the furniture on Amazon, because there was already some SKUs that we were using. Our business was already like 40, 50 apartments. So we already had kind of a set SKUs that we would use. So what we did, we just ordered 52 apartments worth of furniture. It came in tractor trailers of furniture. But we still didn't have the concept of the logistics it would take to do this. So, and we were like, well, how do you build this? So we figured, well, it'll take like 5 people, we'll just do it. And that wasn't it. And I got lucky enough that because we were setting up like an office for us, and I had never heard of TaskRabbit. I hired a guy, and the guy built this desk that it was like super complicated in 5 minutes. And I'm like, aha, this is who we need. We need guys like him to build all the furniture for us. So I just went in and I hired every single person that was on TaskRabbit, every single tasker. I just went down the list, And I got them all there and assembled them. And I'm like, all right, guys, well, we have a whole building of furniture to build. Who wants to make some money? And I'm like, I figured I came up with a price that I could pay them per item instead of paying them by the hour on TaskRabbit. So I was like, well, a bed to me is worth this to build. And I assembled like a team of these skilled builders, and then I just deployed them in an order that would make the project work quickly. So I'm like, okay, you're on beds, you're on couches, you're on tables, and then I had guys just throwing out trash. I'm like the guys that I originally thought would be like building stuff, they didn't have the skills to build this stuff efficiently, or they break most of it. So I'm like, all you guys could do is throw trash out. So like your whole job is just throwing out boxes so the boxes don't clutter the space, so these guys could keep building quickly. And and that's how we built the entire building. And we literally, just so you understand, the day that some people were checking in, because we had to start marketing it even when it wasn't ready. Sure, and people were checking in, and at some points I had a guy like 10 minutes before finishing up building a bed, and a girl just making the bed right there real quick. So like that's the margin of error was really tight in this deal. And that's why we said this could be Fire Fest. Like the people will show up and there's no beds for them. Like this is what it could be. But it wound up not being that, even though like at the beginning it was real Spartan. Like we didn't have like a real slick setup. But since it was spring break and ultra, we figured if we had there's hardly no place to stay anyways. So as long as we had like the minimal stuff that they wanted, like a bed and a table, and it looked clean, and there was a brand new building with a pool, nobody would complain. And they didn't. So like basically all it was like a room with a couch, a bed, no TV yet, and and it was expensive, like $400 a night, but there was nothing else like that and available, and the people were like ecstatic to stay there. And it worked because we made enough to pay the rent in 2 weeks plus a little profit.
So why do you think the building went with you over Sonder? And just for those that don't know, Sonder's a massive company. They just do corporate housing, and they basically do the same arbitrage model, but very, professional, and I would say more like corporate and well-funded. So why did that building go with you instead of Sonder?
Well, it goes back to building relationships. So to get to the meeting with the CEO, took a few meetings with the vice president of the company. And the guy, he kind of realized that we were just like a couple young guys just trying to hustle, he's like, and these guys really like, they got endeared to this whole thing. Like, wow, these two guys, they're really willing to do this. It's like they realized that it was real, that we were willing to like put everything we had on the line to do this one deal. And because we figured if we did this deal, we said, well, this guy's kind of like a kingmaker is what we thought. Like if we do this deal, like nobody could ever tell us that we're not real, because like by the time we do this, we'll both be millionaires or something. and we're spending $2 million to do this deal. So they just felt that we were like that we had such grind to do this deal, and actually they just took the risk. Like they felt that it was an acceptable risk to go with us because we just had the balls to actually ask for this deal. And again, Saunders at that point was worth $200 million. There's another $1 billion company. At that point, they had $200 million in the bank.
Wow.
They had the financials to prove that.
Yeah.
So, and it made it, we're just two guys. And again, that just shows if you get to the table and you ask for the deal, sometimes the deal happens. You just have to be prepared, for the consequences of doing that deal and what comes along with it.
So how did the deal go? And that was when did that stand up, and how's it been?
Well, imagine, and that deal actually got, just so you know, because of COVID, the deal got unwounded. The developer actually paid us to move.
Oh, wow. You set everything up, people started moving in, and then shortly after
we operated for nearly 3 years there.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And when COVID hit, it just I'll tell you what happened so you get some understanding. Those leases have protections because like this is like a commercial lease. So part of the protections on the lease was that if we couldn't operate because of some kind of national emergency, rent would not be due. You know, and because the only way the rent is paid is by revenues, and so rent would not be due. And it was good for the developer. He agreed that would be a smart thing, and his entire portfolio. After he did that deal, he did many other deals with bigger companies, and he had over like 2,000 arbitrage units within his home developments all over the place. So once COVID hit, all the leases got triggered in the same way. And what we all did, we donated the first round, we donated the use of the entire portfolio to the health system. And that bought him a lot of time. I think he got some money somehow, and that was cool. And me and my partners, we were liquid enough that when it was time to start over, we had the money, because once we stopped, your rent became due to start over again. So I came in and we paid him again, whatever it was, 150, another 150, and we started over. And then there was a second shutdown, and that's when it became a problem because he couldn't see. He didn't have another out, like another health system. So me and my partner were the only ones liquid enough to continue. Even bigger companies decided that because their rent exposure out there was much greater than ours, they couldn't pay him anymore because they couldn't pay anybody anymore because they had a few million a month going on in rents. We only had a few 100,000, and we had enough capital to sustain that.
Right.
So when it was time to open up again, we again had the capital.
What did you do with the furniture? Like 52 units in a pinch. And again, I hate to rush just because I know we're tight on time, but what did you do with the furniture of 52?
We had to hire a hotel mover company, and we stored it in a warehouse. And
just we got to put it up, and then trying to figure out where to put it
most of that furniture,
and then put it up in the warehouse, and then try to figure out where you could repurpose those for new units.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we've been doing, and we've repurposed it into other units. But you look, that developer, it was a great relationship because all the bigger companies that he was dealing with, they couldn't perform, and he was right and trusting in us because we were able to perform. And even once things went to hell, we still had the money to pay. And because we just this is our life, so we're really thrifty with our money.
What's the status of Airbnb in Miami right now? I've heard sort of conflicting things. I haven't really looked into it myself because that's not a market I go in, of regulation and like permitting and stuff. How has that been for you? What's the status of it?
Well, there really isn't, look, on a city level, there really isn't a license for Airbnb. That's actually a great question.
But it's legal, you're saying?
It's legal. It's kind of a legal gray area. Like that building that we just talked about, I was the first one to actually get a property like that licensed to be a legal operation. So that's called a non-transient establishment, which is like an apartment building. And I was able to get the state to approve like having two licenses there, a transient and non-transient within that same development. And they had no process for this. So I just kind of we reached out and asked the state, hey, this is what we want to do. And I'm sure that building's political power had something to do with it. I'm not an idiot, but they actually listened enough, and they met us, and they gave us some variances, and they gave us the license. So it is legal, and on an operation like that, you do have to get that type of license. It's not expensive; it's only like $100, just so you know. But you have to do some legal steps, and you have to insurances and things like that. And insurance is a big deal for us. The pandemic too, because we insured our income, and it looks like we're going to get paid for it through proper pending litigation.
For sure. I want to pivot real quick to Turo before we get you out of here. A lot of people I think now are curious about it. I feel like it was a little bit hotter, maybe just more on social media 2 or 3 months ago. We're filming right now, July 22nd, 2021. But if someone is wondering if now is a good time to get into Turo, and they're not sure if their area is a good way to get into Turo. What do you think about starting right now, and how would you consider different areas for Turo? You know, I've heard a lot of people say Miami's great. You could get flashy cars and you can kind of have people coming in and they want to have a little flash. And then I've heard other people say in the Midwest, they've tried it and they had nicer cars. It didn't really work. They went with then lower price cars. But how, if a beginner's listening to this and they're wondering, does my area work for Turo? How can I analyze my market? What advice would you have for them?
Well, and I would use the same strategy that I use on an Airbnb.
Okay.
I go and I look at what cars are hot in that market just on the app,
Like
and
which
you'll be
cars have
able
a
to
lot of
find.
reviews?
Yeah, you look. Okay, this person has a bunch of reviews and a bunch of trips. Maybe a Mercedes doesn't do well here, but a Camry does really well. And then you say, well, then that's the cars I have to stick to. Or a mix of, maybe you don't need a bunch of luxury cars, you need maybe one or two and maybe four transportation type cars like a Camry or something like that. So like the Turo marketplace works in wherever you are. It's just you have to adjust to that market and what's the demand in that area, and that it's easy to actually see what it is just by looking on the app and seeing what cars are actually moving and shifting your business in that direction.
Mm-hmm. And if someone, let's say they're 23 years old, they may have $5,000 to $10,000 saved up, maybe, five, even, let's just go more conservative. And then they're asking, okay, what should I do? Should I lease? Should I buy? Like I don't have a lot of money, but I'm putting all my money into this, like I'm kind of burning the boats. Any advice for that person, a recommendation coming from someone that burned the boats, bet on themselves and came out successful,
Well, I mean, burning the boats is the only way probably to make a change, because once you have some choices, then you probably let fear sink in. But if you had $5,000, I mean, look, cars are easy to buy. I mean, if your credit is decent, you could go out with $5,000 and probably pick up 5 cars or 6 cars if you have good credit. Like I got all those cars, and I think all I had was I made a budget of like $30,000 to get 10 cars, and I was able to do it. So if you have $5,000 and you're creative, I'm sure you could at least get yourself like a mini fleet of cars that are making at least $1,500 a month each. If you're to make it work at that level, you have to work in that business yourself. And if you do, like the first 10 cars, me and my wife were running the cars ourselves, meaning we would take them to the airport and back and everything ourselves. And once you get to like 12 or 13, we hired 2 people to do all the running, and it became a more passive business.
And I assume now that's the last thing I was going to ask before we wind it out here. Is it run pretty much the day-to-day by employees, by staff? Like I assume you're not doing any of the car turns, and if not, who is helping with that? How many people, and kind of what is their day-to-day?
Well, that's good. So once I got to a level of cars like 12 to 13, in my mind, doing my numbers, I felt that was the point where we could afford an employee without taking away all the profit. So we wound up hiring 2 guys, and what they do is, because once we actually were doing the work ourselves, I knew what it would take, the number of employees. It actually takes 2, because most of the trips are runs to like the airport or something. So you need a person to pick them back up. That's basically why you need 2 people. 2 guys could run the whole thing, and all you're basically doing is running the app from wherever you are. So it's a fairly easy business to do, and it's easy to train somebody to do those turns for you.
Lazaro, what's the best way for people to check out your content, learn more, or get in touch?
Well, the best way to get a hold of me would be at brickellcigars on Instagram. And that would be at brickellcigars on Instagram. And DM me or use my Linktree or hit the contact me button there. I'm easy to reach, and I love to talk about arbitrage and cars and everything else.
Lazaro, you're the man. Thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate you.
No problem.
All right, have a good one.
Hey, you millennial millionaire. Are you looking for help getting to the next level in real estate? Are you looking for accountability and strategy to achieve your goals? If so, Jonathan is now taking on one-on-one students and opening a few spots in his private mastermind. It's affordable and welcome to everyone. If you had any questions or think you may need a boost, send Jonathan a message on Facebook or email at jonjfarber@outlook.com.